Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll get started.
This story begins one very dark night. On a branch, as always, sat a bird who watched over the order in his forest. In fact, this bird was not so friendly. As soon as she saw one thing, she immediately became wary and realized that in her forest, they do not get acquainted. At that moment, there were a lot of dead people lying on the ground who had attacked one very beautiful girl. And this girl, who managed to kill them all, received a notification with congratulations because she was able to successfully complete her starting mission of exterminating the disciples of the immortal Cloud Sect. It really was a large number of people, and a rather neat and beautiful girl was able to deal with them all with ease. Then she received a second notification that she had officially received the status of the antagonist of this story. And the man who was sitting on the other side of the screen and watching this girl was very surprised, because he did not expect that she would be so ruthless and that she would be able to destroy her own team. This man was a rather small boy. However, he was very sinister, and after watching the girl for some time, he said that he now had an eye for choosing a master. At that moment, the bird that was sitting on the tree immediately flew away, because this bird was a spy for this little boy, with the help of which he could see absolutely everything. Then the chick landed on the girl's hand, and she asked if it was true what he said about them deserving it. Yes, and besides all that, she felt that it wasn't such a smorgasbord of options for her, so she didn't see her fault. Then she received another notification that everything was correct. If she failed the mission, she would be destroyed by her humble servant. So she had better think about her priorities. In fact, the girl's real name was Ryan Xiaoli, and 3 days ago, a system called Antax saved her life. As she lay in her hospital bed, dying, a window of opportunity appeared before her, asking if she would like to try again to live a new life and see the world again. Of course, this was very tempting for Ryan, because this system so wanted her to become the leading one in its antagonist system. The man who was running this whole operation said that this is essentially what it's like to be an antagonist in this world. He talked about how she could do absolutely anything: mass murder, arson, destruction, intrigue, betrayal, and villainous slander. She would even have to do all this in his new world. Basically, Ryan's job was to be as bad as possible and ruin everyone else's lives. Ryan Lee was the name of the very first master of this youngest disciple of the Cloud Immortal Sect leader in the world. A stunningly handsome man and a prodigy who could grow plants magnificently. But then something unexpected happened. The development went awry, and her immortal training simply went up in smoke. Everything changed completely, and Ryan was, of course, not very happy about it. After she lost heart, she spent years killing her fellow students in order to stay young and absorb their core essence to make pills. The girl had become an incredibly ruthless person and was now engaged in killing her own students in order to continue to maintain her face as it was originally. Ryan walked forward a moment and addressed the system, saying that she wanted to know what was next in her sinister plans. Then the guy who was watching her through the bird said that he had 3 main tasks. First, she must kill her comrades, and second, she must kill my immortal Cloud Sect leader. And finally, the third task was for her to let the main character kill her, and that would be a very honorable end to her story. Ryan, having listened to him, was a little surprised. She said that she was not at all against the first 2 tasks and could easily complete them, but she did not understand why she would throw herself under the deadly hand of the main character. The system immediately explained to her that it needed a good death scene for the antagonist in order for the hero to finally defeat him. Speaking of the main character, he is a human. He is her senior disciple's favorite student, her junior by the standards of the immortal Cloud Sect. Therefore, the guy could not wait to see how he would defeat Ryan, and this ending, in his opinion, would be just perfect. After that, the system said that was it. Ryan, of course, did not like this turn of events, but she went towards the academy and lit a fire. In fact, the girl had removed absolutely all evidence from the crime scene and burned her clothes. Now all that was left was to get rid of that nasty smell of blood, which was always very difficult to remove. The girl went to her room and thought that if she did everything perfectly, then no one would suspect anything. So she was going to spend a few hours in the bathroom to thoroughly wash off the blood and the smell of other people. But just as she was about to open the bathroom door, a man came up to her from behind. She didn't expect it, so she didn't even have time to push him away. This unknown person pulled Ryan closer to him and covered her mouth with his hand. She was, of course, amazed by this and did not understand what was happening at all, because this person's grip was simply amazing. And so, after some time, this man finally let go of her mouth and, sighing heavily right into her ear, said that he was the leading protagonist of Bailey Yankee. The system immediately confirmed this information, and the girl, looking at him in great surprise, did not understand what was going on and why he suddenly grabbed her. When his grip finally loosened, Ryan quickly pushed him away from her and told him not to touch her. However, this man turned out to be quite strong and agile. He put a bandage on her head from the very beginning so that she would not see him, and when she tried to hit him, he did it first. Bailey turned the girl over onto her stomach and grabbed her hands behind her back so that she could no longer resist. The girl was shocked by what had just happened. Then the system turned to her and said that she was now practically a walking vegetable because all her meridians were torn. Ryan didn't like all this. She immediately started yelling at the system, telling it to shut up because she didn't want to be reminded of all this bad stuff when she was already in a terrible situation. The girl tried to clench her hand into a fist and activate her abilities, but it was useless. Then the system turned to her again. This voice said that absolutely all the settings were out of order and there were 2 more changes left in the current world. She turned to the creator and asked him to calm down, breathe, and just look at what happened there. Ryan knew perfectly well that something was definitely wrong with him. This man was quite strong and was acting very strangely. In her opinion, he shouldn't have shown up at all now. At this moment, the man, who was completely red from embarrassment, looked at this beautiful lady and, turning to Elder Ruin, asked if it was really her. The guy also couldn't believe that it was really true and said that she was probably joking with him. He suddenly had tears in his eyes and said that he was very sorry. He also told the elder that someone had deceived him, and that was why he did this. After that, he pulled the girl closer to him and asked if she had any ideas on how she could fix this. As soon as Ryan heard all this, she was very surprised. Then she remembered that she had already drawn a hot bath for herself, and a brilliant idea came to her mind. The girl, sighing heavily, began to use her magical energy and was then able to shake the bath that she had prepared. Absolutely all the water that was in that vessel immediately poured out straight on both of them. The girl, covering his mouth with her hand, asked if he was really thinking rationally now. Bailey looked at her and didn't know what to do. He said her name and said that he thought there was still something wrong with him. He got these weird feelings when he looked at her. The girl, who at that moment had managed to fill a bowl with water, immediately dipped his head into it and asked if even after that he still felt these strange feelings. The guy was completely wet at this point. Water was running down his neckline. He said that he was actually okay now. He really appreciated her help in such a difficult situation. Then the system turned to the girl and said that it was, of course, difficult, but she was glad that she had coped with it. After things finally got better with the guy, Ryan immediately stood up and said that since he was okay now, he better leave immediately. When the boy got outside, he sat on his knees and tried to clear his head. He kept thinking about how the elder hadn't said a word to him, but had simply ordered him to disappear. He knew she was furious about what had happened between them, and of course it upset him very much, although there was nothing surprising about it, because any woman would be furious after what he did. Then he thought that while she could bear it, he would remain on his knees until the sun rose in order to atone for his guilt, because he understood perfectly well that he should not have done so. Several hours had passed since then, and the boy was still kneeling. Ryan had already taken a bath and freshened up. She went outside and asked if he was still there. The man immediately bowed his head to her and told the master that everyone in the Cloud Immortal sect taught that actions should follow words, and since he was the main disciple, he had to set an example for everyone. Since he had made a mistake and disturbed her, he was not going to leave until she stopped being angry with him and forgave him. The man was actually quite confident in his words and said that he still thought he needed to be properly punished because he had crossed the line and did not deserve to be let go so quickly. At this point, Ryan sighed heavily, said that he wanted him to listen to her carefully, and replied that he was not angry with him at all. As she headed to her room, she said that punishing him was the last thing on her mind. It was just her style. She was known for wearing a heart on her hand. Also, he said that someone had tricked him, so he didn't want to physically attack her, and she believed him. The girl also said that he had been kneeling for 2 whole hours already, so he could consider this a lesson, and also asked that next time he keep his eyes well open and look at who he was attacking before doing it. She also said that now he could leave. As soon as the guy heard this, he was incredibly surprised. He still considered himself guilty, but decided to listen to her and stood up. At that moment, he remembered how when he was very young, the elder always believed in him. She praised the boy and said that he was much higher than the others, which meant that he was gifted and the hope of the entire sect. His other teachers also said that he was very good and compared him to a shining star. When the boy made a mistake, his teacher said that they were not allowed to happen without reason, so he had instilled in himself from childhood that he had to pay for his mistakes. And even when he grew up, he still remained a role model for everyone else. He had a huge responsibility, and he had to always live up to the expectations of others. The teachers always told him that he could not show arrogance, weakness, or even a bad mood, and mistakes were absolutely forbidden. Of course, the guy remembered this for the rest of his life and never tried to make mistakes. However, now that he had stumbled, he felt guilty and did not know what to do. When the elder told Bela that he could leave and that she was not angry with him, he felt very pleased because no one had ever said anything like that to him before. At this moment, a young girl ran out to meet him, who was Zhao Qianyi, and she was a close relative of the sect leader. This girl ran up to him and immediately put her arm around his shoulder, asking where he had been, and also asking if he was okay, since he had been gone for quite a long time. She, smiling happily, said that she had looked for him absolutely everywhere, but could not find him anywhere. But the guy at that moment was very unhappy and asked if she had finished with this. He also pulled his hand away from her and was quite angry. The girl immediately burst into tears and asked in a trembling voice why he was so upset. She looked at him with her sweet eyes and said that she had no idea that he was allergic to this tea. Indeed, she did not want to do anything bad to him. In fact, some time ago, a girl came to him and said that she had bought this special sleeping tea specifically. Zhao explained that he should drink this tea and then everything would be completely calm. She even swore to him about it. However, the man was not as pleased as she was, and as soon as the girl approached him, he hit her very hard on the cheek. The girl was, of course, very surprised. However, Bale said in a cold voice that she was the first one who had actually managed to reach him. Then he turned around and started to leave, telling her to listen to him carefully. He also explained that for the sake of the sect leader, he would keep her little game a secret. However, if she tried to do that trick again, her face would no longer be pretty. Zhao didn't react to this at all. She stood there and simply looked at him with an icy gaze without saying anything. Of course, she was very upset because this plan had been thought out in advance, and she did not understand why she could not do what she wanted. But the girl was not going to stop there. She thought that he had clearly drunk poison that had been added to his tea, but she did not understand why he was still not sleeping, but was behaving quite cheerfully. And then suddenly, the thoughtful Zhao realized that he had come to all this from behind the mountain, and that meant that he had visited the elder. The next morning, Ryan sat by the window and read her journal to gather her thoughts a little before her workday. She received a notification from the system, which told the girl to listen to it carefully. The system also said that it was time for her to give up her slacker style, since she was the antagonist. She also said that in order to make the plot more exciting, she had increased the difficulty, and every 2 months she needed to kill someone. The girl didn't even take her eyes off the magazine and said that she didn't understand why they were targeting these students at all, even though she was the antagonist. The girl also asked how her character chooses her victims. Does she really have some special system for this? The guy who came up with this game immediately explained that these disciples from all of immortal cultivation weren't exactly saints. They were more like hypocrites. He asked Ryan if she remembered the students she had killed the night before. He explained that they had been behind the heinous attack on the farmer's daughter down on the mountain a few months earlier. Once the girl heard this, she was truly surprised. Now she realized that being an antagonist does not necessarily mean being pure evil. She must admit that she can even sympathize with her character now. After some time, someone knocked on her door. Then the doors opened and Bally came in. He bowed, turned to the girl, and said that the head of the sect urgently required her presence in the Great Hall. Then he looked at her and said that important matters always required her attention, so he was warned to hurry her. Then Ryan quickly changed into her work uniform, braided her hair, and headed off with the man towards the meeting. Then she suddenly noticed that the man had been yawning almost the entire way and asked, had he really slept poorly the night before? She didn't have time to give him a chance to answer and asked, maybe it was a bad dream, and also asked, if so, what was it about? At that moment, Bally already wanted to tell her about what he had dreamed. However, when he remembered the dream, he immediately realized that it was better not to do this. In fact, this dream was quite intimate, where he hugged and kissed the elder and also confessed his love to her. As soon as the guy remembered this dream, his face immediately turned red. He understood that it was very wild. And this morning, as soon as he woke up, he couldn't even get himself together after this dream. As soon as he woke up, he kept thinking about what he had dreamed, and while making his bed, he suddenly didn't even hear someone knocking on his door. Then the doors to his room opened, and the young man said that he had had enough sleep and needed to wake up and enjoy the new day. He came closer to Bale and, seeing his sad expression, said that spring had come and he was very happy about it. But seeing his worried expression, he said he understood everything and asked if he needed to bring him fresh pants. Of course, the man didn't like this behavior, and he, looking somewhere to the side, immediately told the guy to just leave. It was for this reason that Bale could not tell the girl about this dream, so he simply said that nothing like that happened. He just could not fall asleep for a long time. And that's all. But even as he said this, his voice trembled and his cheeks were simply burning. Of course, the girl suspected that this was so, but she did not question him. And so, after some time, they came to the head of the sect, and all those present were already ready to discuss matters. Then, Jen Dowlin, the leader of the immortal cloud sect, addressed the people and asked them to all listen to him carefully. He said that they all probably knew perfectly well why they had gathered right there at that time, and suggested that he didn't need to explain anything. Ryan, meanwhile, calmly poured herself some tea and simply listened to what they were talking about. Then suddenly the man turned to the leader and said that the 3-year immortal assembly would take place in just 3 months. And he wondered, didn't they know how some pitiful soul decided to turn their immortal cloud sect into his own personal killing field? He thought it was simply a disgrace. His partner immediately said that if they did not find the culprit, they would become a laughingstock for the entire meeting. Then someone approached Bale and said that he, as their chief disciple, would also be involved in this matter. He asked the boy to catch this man as quickly as possible and also give him and the dead disciples answers. The guy bowed and immediately said that of course he would do everything. However, suddenly someone turned to the leader and asked what would happen if they did not find this killer. However, Jen said not to be funny, because of course there was nothing the guy couldn't handle, so there was nothing to worry about. At this point, Ryan raised her cup of tea and said that the drink tasted like bile and asked for another serving. As soon as the other elders heard this, they were simply furious. They did not like the fact that the girl was behaving as if she was the mistress of this entire place, but Bailey wasn't going to disobey her. So taking the cup from her and bowing, he said that he would bring everything right away. Then people started whispering among themselves and did not understand who she was, because she asked for tea during a meeting of elders, and even started to be picky about it. One of the guys turned to the person who asked the question and said that he was new to the place. He explained that the girl was Ryan Lee, and she was their oldest. He also said that if he was not mistaken, she was the last disciple of the old sect leader and the former mate of their current leader, so her presence was quite important in this hall. Another person agreed with him and said that she was super talented, but she had overexerted herself and ruined her meridians. However, the sect leader still continued to take care of her, and always took her opinion into account in such meetings. One of the disciples also said that even if she could no longer cultivate, she could sit in this place in the higher league and see the disciples bowing down to her. Bailey, who was passing by them at that moment and heard this conversation, immediately became indignant, shouted at them, and told them to watch their tone and not to address the elder like that. But the boys didn't listen to him, they just laughed. Then he brought the girl a new cup of tea and thought that she had probably caught him by surprise and decided to talk to him. But seriously, he didn't understand. Did the other students always discuss and scold her like this? It was quite strange for him. When Ryan took the new cup of tea, she smelled it and was already satisfied. She turned to everyone and told them to continue their meeting now. The leader immediately turned to Bailey and said that this situation with the murderers was extremely serious and they needed to catch them as soon as possible. He had 1 month, but he changed his mind and said that half a month was the maximum time for him. The guy bowed and immediately told the master that he would do absolutely everything as he was told. Ryan, meanwhile, responded that these murders are brutal. They are stabbing and strangling these poor students while they are alive. She also feels like this killer is out for blood and maybe even revenge to do this. As soon as Bailey heard this, he was immediately very surprised. He looked at the girl because usually she did not say a word at such meetings, but here she decided to express her opinion openly in front of everyone. But the girl continued. She said that, besides, this man must be short. She had checked the evidence this morning, and the marks of strangulation with silk go from top to bottom. This indicates that he is much shorter than all the victims. Those present were immediately able to imagine this sinister picture, how exactly these unfortunate students were killed. Then one of them turned to the master and said that she was absolutely right about the marks, because they had conducted a thorough examination and noticed this too. The girl, meanwhile, looked at Bailey and said that this could help narrow down the circle of suspects, since short people would be easier to look for. As soon as the commander heard this, he immediately smiled happily and said that this was a very good observation. And also, addressing the guy directly, he told him to remember this important detail and stick to it. Bailey immediately bowed and told the master that, of course, he would remember this and take this information into account in his search. And at that moment, he himself thought that Elder Ron had just helped him again, and he felt very pleased about it, and he was glad. At that very moment, the system turned to Ryan and asked, "Did she really just say all those clues out loud? And was she afraid that he might understand everything?" The meeting was already over, so the girl went outside and said that she couldn't stand the way they were piling everything on this man. And besides, the creator himself said that they needed to speed things up, so this would help them. At that moment, the bird landed on her finger again, and she sighed heavily and tried to drive it away, telling it not to let the dirty bird get in her way. But then suddenly the system again sent a notification that even her bird looked more like an antagonist than she did, and suggested that most likely this animal had gone hunting for snacks for its children. Ryan at this point swatted the bird off her finger and said, "Antago." She wondered if he ever considered that maybe their charm meter needed a serious upgrade. The guy thought for a while and said that it was true, as if they had a whole team to fix various shortcomings, but he definitely took it into account. Ryan then sighed heavily and said that she knew there weren't many of them, and added that she had always been pretty lonely, so she understood what he meant. The boy who heard these words also became a little sad. He did not say anything for a while, because he seriously thought about his life and the fact that no one even helped him in developing the game. But then he turned to the girl and told her not to play the sympathy card, because she just needed to do her tasks, or he would erase her faster than she could blink. Ryan was a little worried at this point because he did have power in his hands, and said that she would listen to him. However, she was annoyed by the noise, and she really wished there was an option to turn it off sometimes. At this very time, Bailey had already assigned some students to help him with the investigation, and then a few hours later, the boys came to him and said that they had checked everyone who was short enough to be a suspect. The guy also told the commander that only the rear mountain remained to be checked and asked if he thought it was worth checking it. At this point, Bailey thought for a while and did not answer. He looked towards this very mountain and did not even know how to act correctly. He didn't have time to say anything when suddenly a female voice was heard from behind, addressing him. Turning back, he saw Ju running straight towards him and saying that he had worked so hard that she wanted to talk to him about something. She handed him a small box and asked him if he would like to try her latest baking project. She wanted to see if her cooking skills had improved. She also thought that maybe he could use a snack after working so many hours. However, the man quickly declined and said that he had already told her not to do something like that. Ju was very surprised. She immediately asked, "Is he still worried about that tea topic?" She also said that she had already changed and thought they had closed this conversation. At that moment, the boys immediately started whispering among themselves. One of them turned to Bailey and said that this girl was so sweet and she couldn't do anything bad to him, so they wanted him to stop torturing her already. Another agreed with him and said that it looked a bit ridiculous when he tried to dominate such a small and cute woman who was paying him so much attention. At this point, Joe handed him the basket and said that if he didn't forgive her, it was okay. However, she still thought he needed to take care of himself. She asked him to take at least some food, and then she would leave the investigation to him. The girl was ready to swear that she would do nothing wrong. Of course, the guy didn't want to accept all this and, pushing the basket aside, asked her to just leave. But at that moment, someone else's voice was heard from behind, saying that coercion, even for a good cause, was a bit stupid. When the guy turned to the side, he saw that it was Ryan. She looked at the two of them and said that it could be as harmful as malicious intent, so she advised the girl to think about it carefully. At that moment, she was holding the magazine she was reading in her hands and came closer to them. Bailey immediately ignored the girl and approached the elder, saying that he was very glad to meet her again. The girl explained that she was simply leafing through a picture book and read the line because she had nothing else to do. However, when she saw the expression on Joe's face, she immediately wondered, had her little reading really affected her nerves? At this point, Bailey knelt down and bowed, saying that her opinion was always so accurate and it was incredibly important for them to listen to her words. And at that moment, he himself thought that the girl had helped him again, and he was incredibly grateful to her for it, which was not the case with Jo. She was very angry and said through her teeth that she would leave the man to his investigation. However, she asked him not to forget about her, and also said that they would see each other a little later. Of course, she was incredibly angry at the elder because she had foiled her brilliant plan. She also assumed that there was something unusual between her and Bailey. At this point, one of the students turned to his friend and asked, "Is this really the same woman, the elder who lost her powers?" He also added that she was quite beautiful, but her tongue could be sharper than a sword. When the guy said something bad about the girl, a bird with red eyes seemed to appear out of nowhere and started flying straight at him. When he turned around, he already felt a strong pain in his forehead, because she had hit him so hard that he even had blood there. After that, the little bird headed towards the elder and calmly sat right on her shoulder. Ryan immediately patted her on the head and told her that she had given her a few problems, since landing on her like that was essentially declaring her as her master. She also told him to fly away next time after a collision to avoid various accusations. The guy who was pecked on the forehead by the bird immediately started cursing. He turned to Bailey and asked if he could even believe it, since this woman was raising such a bad bird right on their Sect's territory. He also said that it must be her who is the culprit of all this, so he believed that she should be taken in for questioning because she is also short in stature, and it is possible that something is wrong with her. But their commander immediately shouted at the guy, telling them to take him away from that place and take him into custody because he had shown disrespect. But the guy, of course, was indignant. He said that he knew it because a man knows how to do justice. However, he was wrong, because he thought that this girl would be taken into custody. Bailey glanced at him and said that this disrespectful student needed to be tied up and taken to the disciplinary cell so that he would learn how to communicate properly. He also told them to give him 100 blows on the shoulder so that the boy would remember this lesson well. At that moment, the other disciples grabbed him and began to lead him away towards the Sect's settlement. Of course, he was very surprised by this, began to scream and say that it was not his fault and did not understand how this could happen. Bailey meanwhile glanced at him and said that he served Elder Ruin, and then blamed her left and right. It all sounds like he deserves a taste of his own medicine. He also asked the guy if it was true that he wanted justice, so in that case he could calmly consider that everything was done, because he would be punished fairly. The disciple immediately began to shout that this was all wrong. He saw the error of his ways and asked for mercy because he did not know what to do. But when he was taken away, Ryan at that moment came closer to the man and said that she wanted to know if he really came to her city because he suspected her of murder. She also said that if that was the case, he could have just asked her. They would have clarified it and discussed it. It was not necessary to make such a scene, but the man said that he could not even dream of it. So, of course, he did not consider her guilty. Then Ryan replied that she would go down the mountain. Since he wouldn't agree to stay to question her, he should leave this place too. However, before they parted, the man suddenly became curious about where she had been going before, and he asked her about it. The girl, sighing heavily, replied that she had simply been doing some business in the city, that was all. Bailey then came closer to her and said that the city had not been so quiet lately and the criminal might strike again. So he asked her what she thought about him accompanying her down the mountain. Of course, the girl was a little surprised when he suggested this. However, she could not refuse, so they soon set off on their journey together. Ryan walked next to the man and thought about something all the time, and at the same time she ate nuts that she had already managed to buy in the city, and the man carried some more things that she had bought. The landscape around them was simply the most beautiful, because it was the beginning of autumn, and all the leaves around were already beginning to turn yellow and fall. Bailey suddenly thought about it, glanced at the girl, and realized that she was completely different in reality than he thought, because all the time he thought that she was on a strict diet. However, she, like most girls, has some special weakness for sweets. When the girl herself saw that he was looking at her so intently, she immediately suspected something. She did not understand why he did not take his eyes off her, and even thought that she wanted those nuts too. Ryan turned to him and asked if he wanted to take a few to try. Bailey was immediately very surprised and thought for some time about what to answer. But then he simply turned away from her and said that he didn't need it at all, and also added that she should just move forward. Bailey also said that the master always instilled in him the need to behave like a true top student, so he was going to maintain that status. But at that moment, Ryan suddenly turned to him and immediately shoved the nut right into his mouth. The man, of course, was very surprised, but in order not to choke, he swallowed it and ate it. The girl, looking him straight in the eyes, asked why he didn't tell her that he wanted to try it too, because she noticed how he looked at her the whole way. At this point, Bailey turned away from her again because he was so embarrassed. He then asked her for forgiveness and told the elder that such a thing would never happen again. But the girl ignored his apology and asked if he liked the chestnut. The man thought about it for a while, and suddenly his ears even turned a little red from embarrassment. Then he said that this nut was very tasty and sweet, and that it was cooked just perfectly. However, Ryan, who was left a little behind, was suddenly very surprised and did not understand why he suddenly started walking so quickly. Well, some time passed from that moment, and he finally brought the girl to her home. When Ryan went inside and took the fabrics she had bought from him, she was still a little surprised by his strange behavior. She started reading one of her books and noticed that the hairs she had left inside the book on purpose were no longer there. This could only mean that he offered to escort her into town in order to create a distraction while his team searched her room. With a heavy sigh, she turned to the antagonist and said that this main character was a real bastard, because she believed that this was not the way to act. The girl also replied that in this situation she would be captured and killed too soon, so she had to do something. The game developer, smiling happily, told her to wait, because this might not be the whole story. So he suggested that she not panic yet. The developer also said that, according to the original plot, the main character simply burst into the room and did his job. However, this time, for some reason, he carried her down the mountain. He told Ryan that the guy was probably being considerate and trying to protect her feelings, but the girl wasn't even happy about that. She said that maybe she needed to be a little more careful when she made her next move. The guy immediately asked if he even had some feelings for the girl, since he could so easily agree to such signs of attention and cherish her feelings. He asked the girl if she didn't find it quite interesting, because this brilliant Gore falls in love with a heartless villain, and everyone would be very interested in whether the emotionally inhibited Joe could actually care about him. The guy, still smiling, also said that if that was the case, he would have to kill her. This was a very rare moment of vulnerability for this woman, so he could not wait for all the main events to develop to see what would happen. At this very time, Bailey had already gone to the leader of their sect to report what he had learned during this time. He knelt down and bowed before him and said that he welcomed him and that he had come to have a very serious talk with him. The man looked at him with a stern gaze and told the boy to stand up, and also asked if he had made any progress in their investigation. Bailey immediately rose to his feet and replied that, with all due respect to Elder Ryan, he had been diligently pursuing the criminal, but had not yet identified any suspects. But when he was about to say something else, his commander suddenly interrupted him and told the guy to speak completely freely, without any formalities or concealing information, because it was important. Bailey responded that while researching the backgrounds of the last two fallen disciples, he discovered a disturbing similarity. Both men were involved in a brutal attack, and the subsequent death of a young woman in a village near the mountain about 6 months ago. They also participated in this terrible act. As soon as the commander heard this, he immediately started shouting and said that these were shameful creatures. Such actions were corrupting a part of the Cloud Immortal sect, and he did not understand how they could not discover and know about this earlier. Bailey replied that he had also found similar crimes among the previously killed disciples, in addition to acts of violence and theft. They had behaved disgustingly and were a nuisance to the rest of the sect. So the boy dared to assume that the killer was choosing students who had committed misdeeds. And besides, their death seemed to him a grim form of justice. However, this criminal could be understood. The commander thought about all this for a while, but told the boy to continue because he would like to hear a full report. Their top disciple then replied that this murderer was deviating from the typical path of a righteous, merciful person, and if he was motivated by a sense of justice, then someone would expose the offenders and demand official punishment through the Immortal Cloud sect. However, this same killer resorts to private executions with the infliction of excessive force and pain so that the victims suffer and atone for their sins before their death. So Bailey believed the most likely explanation was that it was a deep mistrust of authority and the justice system that had prompted him to take matters into his own hands and act as he saw fit. The commander, after listening to him, was very surprised. However, he said that it was a pretty good observation, but he was afraid of the fact that someone might not trust their sect. He thought for a while, then said that the guy was a great guy. But he also added that he should continue the investigation and said that he was completely confident in his strength and abilities. After that, The commander said that if that was all, then he could go free. However, he needed to remember that he had to maintain his training regimen during this matter because the immortal meeting would be approaching quite quickly, and the man said that he expected the boy to take first place and bring honor to their sect. Bailey immediately bowed and said that he was not finished yet and had one more thing he wanted to talk about. The man was a little surprised but immediately asked what it was. Then the guy looked him in the eye and explained. He said that winter was coming, and he noticed that Elder Ryan's mountain quarters seemed a little bare, and she had not yet prepared for the cold. He wondered if they should send someone there to bring her supplies. As soon as the commander heard this, he sighed heavily and said that she was still as independent as ever, and that was why she kept silent about her needs. He also thought that sooner or later, this would come back to haunt her. But he still agreed with the guy and said that next month he would send her and the students on a trip to the Immortal Mountains. This would be the greatest rest for her. Bailey was very surprised to hear this and then asked, would the elder really go with them to the Immortal Assembly? Of course, he was very happy about it. Some time passed from that moment, and he came to the forest again, where other students had already gathered, who had been continuing their investigation all this time. The man he declared his protector said that absolutely everyone had arrived, and he suggested that they move on, because they wanted to reach the Immortal Mountains earlier to finish everything as soon as possible. But Bailey asked him to slow down for a while, since Elder Ryan was not with them yet. And the girls who were walking behind, because they were also called to go to the mountains, suddenly asked where she was, because everyone had already gathered, and they also did not understand how she could make them wait at all. Then her friend replied that the last time Elder Ryan could barely acknowledge other elders, let alone them, the humble students. So it was no wonder she was acting like this. Bailey replied at this moment that they were just a bit early. Their departure time had not yet arrived, so they could wait for the elder without any problem. The girls, who realized that he had heard them, immediately bowed and said that of course they would wait, and also asked for forgiveness for their rudeness. And so some time passed from that moment, and Ryan finally arrived to them. She collected some things with her, and also changed into a very beautiful and elegant uniform. The girl also put an incredibly beautiful cape on her shoulders, because she knew that it could be quite cold in the mountains, and she braided some flowers into her hair so that they would give her even more fragrance. As soon as the men who were standing there saw her, they were shocked. They didn't expect Elder Ryan to look so stunning. She was absolutely glowing. Bailey was the first to approach the elder and, bowing, immediately greeted her. The girl herself greeted him with a smile. However, at that moment, one of the students approached the guy from behind and asked if they were ready to leave. The man was a little embarrassed, but after clearing his throat, he said that, of course, they could also set off on their way so as not to waste any extra time. Then Bailey, standing on his sword, flew into the air and told everyone else to get ready to fly. This journey would be long, and they needed to hold on tight. As soon as the other boys saw him fly into the air, they immediately began to do the same. In fact, they rarely did this, but when they flew up on their swords, it always amazed them and made them feel a lot of emotions. At this point, Bailey landed back on Earth to check if everyone was ready for the flight, and suddenly turned to the girl and asked if she had brought the sword with her. Ryan was a little worried at this point and said that she was afraid that she couldn't fly on the ball, and so she didn't know what to do. As soon as the man heard this, he was incredibly surprised and could not understand how it was that she could not fly on a sword. This surprised him greatly, since she was an immortal cultivator, and he assumed that it was probably hard for her, since she used to be a master of her craft. But now she can do almost nothing, and he assumed that this was depressing her. Ryan didn't really understand what was so special about riding a ball. It made you feel like you were going to puke, so she figured it would be much better to grab a horse in town and be able to enjoy the scenery at her own pace, without the annoying students around her. But Bailey, coming closer to her, put his hand on her shoulder and told her not to pay attention to these difficulties. He put the girl on his sword, and when the two of them took off, he said that they already needed to go to the mountains, so there was no time to look for another way out. Then the boy glanced at the elder and smiled happily. He was, of course, very happy to help her, because he really had some strange feelings for her. The girl smiled slightly at him in response, but she herself did not understand whether he had always been so attentive to the main villain of this story, and how he could not be careful. The girl at that moment pressed herself closer to him, and said that she was very glad that he helped her, and also replied that she didn't care at all about what the other students thought. As soon as Bailey felt the girl touch his chest with her hand and he grabbed her waist, he felt too awkward. He had never really noticed that her waist was so thin, and it was even a little alarming. It felt like he could just snap her in half at any moment. And besides, her quickened breathing next to his neck made his heart flutter even more. His cheeks began to flush again, and he didn't know what to do with it. They continued to fly after all the students and thought that he needed to focus on getting to the right place calmly and not be distracted by anything else. Quite a few hours had passed since then, and when it was already completely dark outside, they finally arrived. Unfortunately, it was still too far to the desired destination, so Bailey considered it necessary to take a short break at the dacha, and turning to the students, told them to put up tents. And he asked the students to gather some wood so that they could light a fire. The students were to follow him on a hunt. The girls immediately bowed and said that they would do everything. Some of the guys stayed to set up tents while others went with him to get them food. Bailey then approached the elder and said that she was not in the best shape, so he suggested that she just stay put and rest until they got everything done. The girl smiled and said that she, of course, would not be against it, because she really had begun to feel not very well and was quite tired. At that moment, when she went into the woods and took the bottle of water from him, she received a notification from the system, and the guy asked if this was the perfect opportunity to strike because he really hoped that she was not going to listen to all these horror stories around the campfire. Ryan responded at this point that he knew exactly what she needed to do. She also explained that their small group was 12 people. If someone disappeared or died, then of course Bailey would immediately suspect her. It was obvious, and it would be stupid of her to do so. So the girl said that their sect has a lot of students, and especially short ones, so it makes her much more secretive. However, if she starts to act so recklessly, she will definitely lose everything she can. At this moment, the girl sat and watched as the other students brought in firewood to make a good fire that would warm them at night. But the game developer suddenly laughed and said that being an antagonist is not always as good as one might think. He also added that he can't wait to see her sweat and fight to complete her mission. The girl decided to meditate a little and said that they would, of course, see how everything would turn out. One of the students suddenly whispered to her friend and said that she had really hoped that she would be able to get closer to Bailey during the trip. However, he had been glued to the elder all day, and unfortunately, she had no chance to talk to him. Her friend was also a little worried and said that maybe she should have pretended to be clumsy and said that she couldn't ride a sword either. Then he would have helped them too. Joe, who had been moving away from these girls, heard all this and became very wary, because she was the first to start sharpening her teeth at Bailey. A few more hours passed from that moment. The fire was already burning very well, and the girls were able to warm up. And finally, the men returned from hunting. They began to brag to the girls about their dead animals that they had managed to catch and kill, and said that these were whole rabbits for their dinner, and they were very happy and proud of it. The girls, of course, as soon as they saw this, were simply horrified, because the rabbits were incredibly cute, and she did not understand how one could eat them at all, much less kill them. As soon as Bailey returned, the first thing he did was go to the elder and ask what part of the deer she preferred, because he could roast it for her. But the girl replied that in fact she would like to eat rabbit, not deer, because she prefers it more. Some time passed from that moment, and now everyone finally sat down by the fire and cooked their dinner because they were incredibly hungry. In fact, Bailey thought that the girls would like the rabbits and wouldn't even think of eating them. However, Elder Ryan chose him first, and he thought that she was one of a kind. The boy started chatting with the elder, and when he finally finished frying the rabbit, he said that he had marinated it with herbs and wild berry juice beforehand. He also said that he was curious if she would like it, so he was already waiting for her to try it. As soon as Ryan saw this rabbit, she couldn't contain her emotions. She immediately took the first bite and began to enjoy this tender and delicious meat. The man, meanwhile, sat next to her and watched her. In fact, he had no idea that the elder could be so charming under her cold exterior. Then he started frying himself a few portions, smiling. The guy told her not to hurry because she might choke. Bailey also added that if she liked it so much, he could cook a rabbit for her anytime they were on the road. The girl didn't respond to this. She just silently enjoyed what she had, and also thought that he definitely had the features of the main character, and she even began to like him a little. Joe, who was sitting nearby and eating her meat, suddenly became very wary. She did not understand why Bailey was spending time with the elder, and so much at that. The girl didn't understand why she couldn't roast her own meat. Sure, she had lost her cultivation, but her arms weren't broken, and she didn't understand why all these extra attentions were needed. When everyone had finally eaten and even sung a little by the fire, little by little, everyone began to fall asleep. Bailey turned to the people and said that it would be better to go to bed early, because tomorrow they would have a big day of travel, and everyone should be cheerful. Of course, no one objected. Many people had already begun to fall asleep, even while walking. Then the guy suddenly stood up from his seat and said he would check the perimeter before going to bed because it was important. You never know what could happen. Then he went deep into the forest to check everything out, and then suddenly he noticed Ryan sitting all alone near one of the trees. He was a little surprised when he saw her. He was about to say something, but when he looked more closely, he noticed that the elder had fallen asleep. Then the guy smiled slightly and looked for some time at the beautiful sleeping girl, in whom he experienced some feelings. He thought that when Elder Ryan was asleep, her usual cold appearance simply melted away, and she became an incredibly sweet and very good-natured girl. He thought that she was probably well over 100, but if you closed your eyes, you would think that she was barely 15. So well could she maintain her youth. The man suddenly noticed that her cape was starting to slide off her shoulder, and he knew that she could get very cold, so he came closer to her to fix it. As soon as he did this, he suddenly felt Ryan's body begin to approach him. The girl was so tired that she did not even wake up and could not keep her balance. He didn't wake her up, but simply extended his shoulder to make the girl feel comfortable. Then, because she was too tired, she even started saying something in her sleep. Ryan said that it was better to dip the rabbit's head in sauce, add some spices, and stew it. The man immediately smiled sweetly. He did not think that the elder could talk in his sleep, and especially about cooking a rabbit. He also thought that the girl was as beautiful as the rabbit. He sat for some time and watched her beautiful, calm, peaceful sleep.